In part 1, we witnessed Adesewa's painful separation from her family, the bitterness that festered between her and Iyabo, and the difficult journey she had to go through to become a medical doctor. But now, with Iyabo facing a life-threatening illness, what happens next? Let's find out as we continue this journey. When Kunle received the call, he was silent for a long time. The man who had once been full of energy and hope was now a shell of himself, paralyzed by the weight of his wife's diagnosis. His pride, his resentment toward Adesewa, and the financial ruin that had consumed their life, all of it seemed to collapse in on him in that moment. Iyabo, on the other hand, tried to stay strong, but the diagnosis shattered her. She had always been the pillar of their home, and now she felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath her. Her condition deteriorated quickly, and the family's desperation grew. Kunle, who had always believed in finding a solution, now found himself powerless. His connections, his money, none of it could save his wife. And Iyabo, her sharp tongue, her pride, was no match for the looming threat of death. She began to soften, but not in a way that brought comfort. Instead, it was a desperate, unspoken plea for forgiveness, but it was too late. The cracks in their relationship were too deep. Adesewa heard the news through a mutual contact, a nurse who had once worked with her in the hospital. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to carry on with her life, knowing that anything she did would never be enough to heal the wounds of her past. But deep down, she felt a tug, a call to do something. For the first time in years, she called Kunle. When Adesewa walked into the hospital room where Iyabo lay, the air felt thick with tension. Kunle's face was drawn, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights and worry. Iyabo, pale and frail, was barely recognizable from the vibrant woman she had once been. The illness had taken its toll on her, and she looked smaller, fragile, as if the very life force that had once burned so fiercely within her was now slipping away. "I didn't expect to see you here," Kunle said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at her, then quickly turned away, unable to meet her gaze. The years of guilt, the unresolved pain between them, hung heavy in the room. Adesewa didn't know what to say. The woman who had cast her aside, who had made her feel like an outsider, was now the one lying in a hospital bed, struggling to breathe. And yet, as much as it hurt to admit, Adesewa knew she couldn't turn her back. Not now. Not after everything. "I'm here to help," she said softly, her voice steady, though her heart ached. "I'm a doctor now, Uncle Kunle. I can help her." Kunle looked at her, then at Iyabo, whose eyes flickered toward Adesewa with a mix of shame and sorrow. The moment of confrontation had come. There was no going back. As Adesewa examined her, she felt the weight of every past moment they had shared, the hurtful words, the rejection, the endless struggles. But despite it all, as she reviewed Iyabo's test results and medical history, something shifted. She wasn't just Adesewa anymore. She was the healer, the person who could change the course of this woman's life. Iyabo's condition was severe, but Adesewa had access to some of the best oncological treatments available. She spoke with the doctors, made adjustments to Iyabo's care plan, and reassured the family that there were still options, albeit difficult ones. The process would be long and painful, but Iyabo still had a fighting chance. Kunle, who had once been the pillar of their home, now leaned on Adesewa for guidance. He looked at her with a new understanding, and for the first time in years, he saw her not as the girl he had abandoned, but as a strong, capable woman, someone who was capable of saving his wife. Iyabo, too, began to soften, her pride and bitterness slowly dissolving as she became more aware of how far Adesewa had come. For the first time in years, they were no longer divided by the pain of the past. Instead, they were united by the fight for Iyabo's life. The days that followed Iyabo's diagnosis were long and difficult, but Adesewa's presence seemed to bring a new energy to the family's efforts. At first, Iyabo's pride kept her from fully accepting Adesewa's help, but with each passing day, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. The once dominant matriarch, who had ruled her home with an iron fist, now lay vulnerable, her once commanding presence reduced to a faint whisper. And yet, in the midst of her suffering, there was a quiet strength that emerged, a strength that came from the love and care that Adesewa now provided. Adesewa was relentless in her efforts, using every ounce of her medical knowledge and experience to give Iyabo the best possible care. She worked closely with the oncology team, ensuring that Iyabo's treatment regimen was as comfortable as possible, constantly adjusting medications and therapies to minimize the side effects. The journey was grueling. Each chemotherapy session left Iyabo weak and nauseous, but with every moment there was a glimmer of hope that shone through the darkness. Kunle, who had once been too proud to ask for help, began to see his daughter's strength in a new light. He witnessed firsthand the compassion and professionalism Adesewa brought to the table, and it humbled him. The girl he had once cast aside was now the one who was keeping his family together, providing the very thing that he himself had failed to offer: care, empathy, and understanding. It was a humbling experience for him, one that made him reflect on the years of neglect and missed opportunities to truly connect with his daughter. "I never knew how strong you were," Kunle said one evening, sitting beside Adesewa after a long day of treatments. "I've spent so much time focused on my own failures. I never stopped to see the woman you've become. I can't undo the past, but I'm grateful for you now, Adesewa. You've brought hope back into our lives." Adesewa didn't know how to respond. The bitterness she had once felt toward her uncle had started to fade, replaced by something more complex, perhaps forgiveness, or even a tentative acceptance. She had spent years resenting him for abandoning her, for leaving her in the hands of his cruel wife. But now, in the face of Iyabo's illness, she saw the cracks in his armor. He wasn't the villain she had imagined all those years. He was just a man, doing his best in a world that had overwhelmed him. "Thank you for saying that," she replied softly, her eyes focused on her mother's frail form across the room. "I know we've both made mistakes, but all that matters now is getting Auntie Iyabo through this, and if I can help with that, I will." Iyabo's recovery was not an easy road. There were moments of improvement followed by setbacks that left the family feeling defeated. Yet, through every difficult day, one thing remained constant: Adesewa's unwavering commitment. She remained by her side, offering not only medical care but emotional support as well. Slowly, Iyabo's pride began to give way to something softer: vulnerability. As the chemo treatments drained her strength, she relied more and more on Adesewa. The woman who had once looked at her with disdain now became the very person Iyabo needed to survive. One afternoon, as Adesewa adjusted the IV drip and checked her vital signs, Iyabo reached for her hand. The gesture was unexpected, but it carried a weight that words could not convey. Adesewa looked down at her, seeing the raw sincerity in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Iyabo whispered, her voice fragile but filled with remorse. "For everything. For the way I treated you. I was wrong, Adesewa. I was angry at the world, and I took it out on you. But you've shown me a love that I never gave you. You've given me a second chance, and I don't deserve it." Tears welled in Adesewa's eyes, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. In that moment, the years of pain, neglect, and bitterness began to melt away. For all the hurt that had passed between them, there was now a bond forged through shared struggle. It wasn't perfect, and it would take time to fully heal, but it was real. "I forgive you, Auntie Iyabo," Adesewa said quietly, her hand squeezing Iyabo's gently. "We both have our faults, but I'm here now, and that's all that matters." As the days turned into weeks, Iyabo's condition began to stabilize. The chemotherapy was working, albeit slowly, and for the first time in months, the family dared to hope. But the road to recovery was still long, and the emotional scars of the past were not so easily erased. Adesewa, however, had come to terms with much of her past. The years of bitterness, anger, and resentment had been replaced by a quiet understanding. She had learned that forgiveness was not about excusing the wrongs done to her, but about freeing herself from the weight of those wrongs. It was a gift she had given not just to Iyabo, but to herself as well. In the quiet moments they shared, as they sat together by the window or as Adesewa helped Iyabo with her exercises, they began to rebuild the mother-daughter relationship they had never truly had. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of awkward silence, times when old wounds threatened to surface. But each day, they moved closer to the family they had never been. Kunle, too, found a new sense of purpose. His relationship with Adesewa had become one of mutual respect. He now saw the woman she had become, a woman capable of both great strength and deep compassion. And with that recognition came a sense of peace he had never known. As the family gathered around the dinner table one evening, sharing a simple meal prepared by Adesewa, there was a sense of calm in the air. It was the kind of calm that came not from the absence of struggle, but from the acceptance of it. They had all been through a great deal, but together they were stronger for it. Iyabo's health continued to improve, though the road to full recovery was still uncertain. Adesewa, now a respected oncologist, had become the center of her family's emotional support system. She had helped save her mother-in-law's life, but more than that, she had brought the family back from the brink of ruin. Her work as a doctor had become her true calling. She was no longer just a healer of bodies, but a source of hope for those in despair. Her story, the story of a young girl who had faced the harshest of circumstances and emerged stronger, had become a beacon for many. As she continued her work in oncology, Adesewa also began to mentor younger doctors, offering them not only medical knowledge, but the wisdom of someone who had faced tremendous adversity. She was a living testament to the power of resilience, and in her patients' eyes, she was more than just a doctor. She was a symbol of possibility. And yet, through it all, her heart remained rooted in her village of Olorunda. Her work, her success, her newfound family, they were important, but they were not the end of her journey. Adesewa knew that she had a greater purpose, to give back to the community that had once nurtured her. She had always been the crown of beauty, but now she was the crown of hope. Months passed since Adesewa's return to her family, and though the echoes of the past still lingered, the path forward was clearer now. Her once fractured family, Kunle, Iyabo, and their children, had begun to heal, albeit slowly. Adesewa's role in this healing process was undeniable. She had always been a beacon of light, but now, with her return to the city after her time in Olorunda, her influence extended beyond the walls of her home. The village of Olorunda and the people she had known as a child stood proud of her accomplishments. Kunle, who had initially taken Adesewa in after the death of her parents, found himself humbled by the woman she had become. His guilt had consumed him for years, but seeing Adesewa blossom in spite of it was the greatest form of redemption he could have asked for. It was a long road for him, but slowly he began to understand that it was not enough to simply feel regret. True redemption came from action, from making things right. He had failed her when she needed him most, but now he sought to make amends, to show her that he had grown. Iyabo, too, had transformed. The bitterness and resentment that had once clouded her heart had been washed away by the very kindness she had once scorned. Through Adesewa's care and forgiveness, she had found herself facing the consequences of her past cruelty with humility and a willingness to change. As her health improved, she began to realize the depth of her mistakes, and the more she tried to make things right, the more she found herself learning from the young woman she had tried to suppress for so long. The city that had once overwhelmed Adesewa now felt like a place of endless possibility. Her success as an oncologist had led her to become not only a healer, but a symbol of hope. She was a speaker at medical conferences, a mentor to younger doctors, and a guiding light for cancer patients who saw in her not just a physician, but someone who had truly walked through the darkness and emerged stronger on the other side. Her work extended beyond medicine. With the recognition she gained, she created initiatives to give back to underserved communities. She spearheaded educational programs for young girls and worked with nonprofit organizations to bring healthcare to rural areas, communities like the one she had come from. Adesewa had never forgotten her roots, and she used her platform to help others find the same light she had found through the help of compassionate people along her own journey. Her legacy would not be measured by wealth or titles, but by the lives she had changed, the hearts she had touched, and the strength she had passed on to others. And as the night sky stretched above her village, she felt a profound connection to all who had walked with her. Her journey was not just hers. It was the story of everyone who had believed in the power of hope, kindness, and the unbreakable human spirit.
If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to our channel for more African folktales and legends. Help us keep the traditions of our ancestors alive by sharing our content with your friends and family. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.